one of the things I love most about what Gen Z has done, and I think you did such a great job of articulating this, you talked about the consistency. Like there's just not a let up. And for you, when you think about that consistency, what do you think drives that for Gen Z and maybe even the generation after that, Generation Alpha to come? Like, what do you think it is that makes it to where you must be consistent on social issues?
Well, I wanted to touch on that you brought up Trayvon Martin. And so I was 12 years old, right, when that tragedy happened. And a lot of my peers were also very young. But, that's something that, really shaped our view on racial injustice from a very young age, for example. And so then when you fast forward to Black Lives Matter, and you see, these droves of young people and young allies who are not even within the Black community, who are coming out, who are speaking against this injustice. We're witnessing the same atrocities from an even younger age. So that's something that I feel like is this shared, this trauma and this heaviness that we have across multiple generations of people, and we're all metabolizing that differently into action, into speaking out. And that consistency, like what we're speaking about, it really does come from recognizing the patterns of injustice and of systemic oppression and of the triple evils of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. speaks about. And I think what's really crucial is the fact that you might hear a lot of young people speak on, well, the previous generation, has been. I think there's a thing of ancestry again. Previous generations have been really striving to make an impact. I want to speak specifically to Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities. So many of our parents and grandparents and people who have come before us have fought for us to be able to live better lives free of this systemic oppression and of these systems in place that are designed to hold down specific groups of marginalized people. And the thing about it is these same systems and injustice still exist. They have different names, they have different shapes, they have different ways that they show up in our society. It's constantly evolving, and it's constantly a chase to pin down and get to the root of the situation. And because we have seen that and we've witnessed that with the people that have come before us, and we've seen these repeated atrocities both within our own communities and around the world, we're at a point where we're like, hey, we can't let up. We can't let people forget that this is something that is, that's still affecting us. I think the thing that's really powerful is this understanding that these systems of oppression that we face are constantly working in the background, right? And we have inflection points like Black Lives Matter marches across the world. But the thing is, that was just as a result of all of the harm and the death and the exploitation of Black and Brown bodies around the world and people around the world that has been causing us so much pain on a daily basis. And it took a lot of people, in non-Black communities, I don't want to say by surprise, but we know this is something that we live with every day. And so it's really important to address these issues while they're on the surface instead of just letting them sink to the bottom where they can continue to fester and continue to impact and harm people. And that's where that consistency comes in. We're keeping it on the surface. We're saying, hey, this is still something that we deal with or that people outside of my community deal with, because there's a lot of overlap in the different pains that our communities experience. And so there's also that intersectionality that I think is very common across Generation Z as well. So that's why that consistency is important. It's just not forgetting and keeping the action going until we get results. I think results is what Gen Z is very driven by. And me myself, I'm a solutions-based activist. I'm very focused on not just educating you on what's happening in the world and how it's impacting people, but also what can be done about it. What are the solutions that we can strive towards?
No, Brittany, over the last 11 years, really since 2012, there have been many tragic moments in Black American life that have led to historic levels of protest and civic engagement. Whether it was the murder and death of Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Alton Sterling, Terrence Crutcher, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, or George Floyd, the impact of a collapsing economy and how COVID-19 directly impacted the entire world. There have been so many things that have impacted the way millennials and Gen Z are experiencing the American life.
That's right.
Do you feel that for millennials and Gen Zs, that these moments have shaped us? And if so, what are some of the ways that you do believe that those moments have impacted us?
I mean, what a great question, and also a critically important introduction you gave to really frame all of these conversations and the consistent work of justice in a global context, right? Because we are not here alone. It would be important for us not to have a Western-centric view or an America First view or an egocentric view that says we're the only people on the planet and the only ones we need to worry about, right? And so given all of the things that you named, and given the violent tragedies that Israeli families and Jewish people across their diaspora, across the world are dealing with in this moment, given the violence and horror that has been continuously heaved upon our Palestinian loved ones, the ways that they are bracing in this moment. I am also thinking about the Arab Spring in this time, right? I'm also thinking about Occupy Wall Street. I'm also thinking about the number of Black-led nations that have detached themselves from colonizing governments, right? We see people from the Caribbean to the continent of Africa deciding to extrapolate themselves from the empire known as Great Britain. There have been actions and movements and protests and campaigns all across the world, from Brazil to Africa to Brooklyn and so many places in between, where folks have stood up very clearly to say that justice is not only due us, that it is in fact our birthright, right? And we know that Dr. King said injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So again, that global context that you set is so critically important. And there's no possible way that one could be a millennial like you and I are, that one can be a Gen Zer, that one can be anybody who's connected to another human being and not have been influenced by this era of uprising, right? I mean, heck, it's been hot strikes. It was hot strike summer in America, right? You got the auto workers, you got healthcare workers at Kaiser, you got SAG-AFTRA and the actors and, costumers, you got the writer's strike. Like, there were so many people coming together and saying, we deserve to live thriving lives. And we deserve to live lives that are free from the threat of violence, of degradation, of dehumanization, of unlivable wages and unbreathable air. And so in that time, it's impossible not to be impacted. I think that, especially when I look at our generation and generations younger than us, one of the ways that we've seen them be impacted and then in turn impact the rest of us is that their timeline, baby, it is much quicker than some of ours, right? Yeah. There are folks who we've seen as revolutionaries and progressives, and then their children are coming along saying, y'all aren't moving fast enough on the climate for me, right? Because we are facing existential threats. Y'all didn't replace all of those lead pipes in Flint. Like, let's go ahead and get after that. And I'm going to keep reminding you until you make it happen. Y'all are still trying to drill into indigenous lands and actually harm our water sources. Yeah. And we don't want to just sit at the negotiating table. We're going to put our bodies on the line to not just dramatize the risk for everybody who is watching, but actually mount the pressure that protest can create so that the powers that be are driven to not only make change, but make change urgently. And that until you do that, we will be right here. And I think that kind of circular influence, if you will, the ways that millennials and Gen Zers and people of all generations really have taken these moments of impact, have taken these global moments of import and said, who am I going to be in this moment? What kind of ancestor will I become? When I look back on what was asked of me in 20 years, will I say I stood by, or will I say I stood up? And I think that has been something that has strengthened global justice movements, irrespective of the issue. And it has certainly strengthened movements inside the Black diaspora.
I think a lot of people are confused about is there's always this association with crimes in community, but there's a disassociation with economic injustice and even poverty. Why do you feel like, even as you're talking about your work, why do you feel like there's been such a disconnect for people between, well, if you have crime and you have people that are suffering, then typically it's related to the fact that there's an economic disparity. Why is economics so left out of the conversation around that?
Yeah, I think it's just willful ignorance. I think it's easier for us to come. It's the solutions are more palatable and easier politically if the answer is just some people are born bad, some people are born criminals, some people just need to be locked up. That's a very easy answer than the answer of some people have been locked out of opportunity. So we have to redirect and rectify that and create more opportunity. That creates a different set of policy remedies that oftentimes people are loath to accept, and it's a little bit more harder because you have to think creatively. You have to, resources are finite in many cases, so you have to like set priorities and allocate resources in ways that may be different to how resources have been allocated and priorities have been set previously. So I think that's really what it is. I think it's all, and also if it's an economic issue, then we're all culpable versus just an individual issue. And then, yes, of course, sometimes there are people who do bad things, who deserve to be, who need consequences and accountability for creating harms. And no one's disagreeing with that. I think the point of our conversation is to talk about how our society, our economy is structured for violence, that there's a pervasive structural violence, and that we are all culpable in the environments that create the conditions that cause people to choose to make antisocial decisions that lead to crime.
You touched on a really key word there, Michael, and it's reparations. Now, reparations is a buzzword for so many people because it suggests, as you stated, handouts are to be made to people who are quote unquote undeserving. But when we look at recent American history, we see that reparations were given to Native Americans via reservation, even though that is clearly not enough. Reparations were also given to Japanese prisoners as they were unjustly placed in prison camps during World War II. And even Germany was forced to pay back reparations for their action during the World Wars. Yet Black Americans have had no true substantial conversation around reparations since we first set foot on this land. And so do you see reparations as something that must happen for economic justice to reach the Black community? And if so, what would that look like for you as you begin that exploration?
Yeah, well, I've talked to folks like in South Africa who were part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and other folks. My state of California is the first state to have a reparations report and study. And I think just for national healing and to move forward, that there has to be some sort of repair for the harms that have been caused, because these harms are still reproducing themselves in the present, which create a lot of the issues we see today. But I think there's multi-layered step from my understanding of reparations, right? So I think I was talking to folks in California about this the other day. Like the cash payment part is going to be hard, maybe necessary, should definitely be debated and studied. But let's just not focus there at first. Like we could do a whole lot of work if we just looked at the policies on the books, the laws on the books, the procedures on the books that have created such disparities and continue to lock some people out of opportunity. And if we just did that, would be a huge step forward as to where we need to go. But I think we also have to have the conversation. But like I said previously, folks have to be educated, because right now the idea is that, oh, my ancestors didn't do anything, so why should I have to pay? Or my ancestors, or I wasn't around for that, why should I have to pay? And it's not about a punishment. It's about an investment in a future that's unsheltered or untethered to the dystopian past that created the present. Like it's really about where are the investments we can make so that our future, we're not having the same disparities we had 400 years ago. And I think when it's framed and folks are educated that way, folks are much more open to the conversation. But it's an upward battle, but it's a fight we have to have. You can't have, like, it just makes no sense to me to have these ideals we speak of and have models and examples, not just in America, but around the world, of folks being given reparations for harms that have been committed, and say that for some reason, Black folks in America aren't even worthy of having the debate or conversation. There's something insidious about that.
So with that, then, would you say a sacrifice zone? That sounds so odd. Like, what does it mean? Like, so are you saying that there are certain communities that whether the federal or state or even at the city level, that they're basically making decisions about particular people groups in particular locations and saying that we can put these harmful substances in this community because we don't necessarily care about the long-term effects for these people?
That's exactly it. I mean, they're looking at a community and in a horrific fashion, and they're saying that this community, these people, do not matter. And that's what's really sad, is that then you know the impact. So from where I am from in Louisiana, our home state is called Cancer Alley, literally because you put so much industry in a community that it causes folks to have cancer. And literally, they're having breast cancer and they have colon cancer and all kinds of diseases because of the industry you put there. And people will say that's the cost of doing business. But the cost of doing business means that you are sacrificing certain communities. And then those communities are normally poor white communities or Black communities or brown communities or indigenous communities. That being why it's called sacrifice zones. And environmental justice, what that term means for us is that means that the government, either the state or the federal government, is ensuring that the laws that are being put forth to stop us from having the harms of this industry, that they're being put in place to protect those communities. And there's sometimes a little bit of a thing with all that doesn't happen. So right now we're in the midst of a situation where those communities have been polluted and harmed. But the bigger impact now that is harming all of us. That's the thing about it. There's no one who is escaping the climate crisis right now. And that's the one thing. If you're in Vermont and you're watching this, or you're in the hills of California, or you're in Atlanta or Detroit, no one is escaping. So the bottom line to all of this is that we have to transition from fossil fuels to clean energy. That's the solution. That's it. It's as easy as that. We got it, and we can get there. The great thing is that the science is telling us, which is fantastic, we still have time. And so we don't got much time, but we still got a little time. So we as humans, Black, white, brown, red, male, female, humans, if we can transition from fossil fuels to clean energy, we have time to literally save the only planet we know, planet Earth.
Wow.
Reverend, have you noticed any type of sacrificial zones and sacrificial communities overseas as well in a global context?
Yes. So one of the things here is that a lot of times when we're in the street, it is based, unfortunately, on bottom line, on their business plan. And when they have these business plans, a lot of times for communities here in America or overseas, that business plan means a death sentence for those communities. So we now know in communities from in Asia, on the continent, in South America, wherever they may be, that they are also creating sacrifice zones. The one thing about America is that sometimes we have a lot of regulations that actually can bring things to light. But those same things that are holding corporations accountable here in America then are pushing them overseas to then do that. And what we don't want to do is have those communities, particularly if they're in South Africa, or they're in Ghana, if they're in Korea, if they're in Trinidad and Tobago, wherever they may be, We do not want them to be having the harm. So again, the ultimate goal here is that we need to transition from fossil fuels to clean energy. And we have those solutions. We have renewables, we have solar technology, wind technology. We have so much technology now that allows us to transition from one to the next.
Well, I feel like as a listener, even thinking about how some of our audience might be hearing that. So we're saying that we're in a moment of crisis, and I know people have seen this because social media is obviously an extremely powerful tool and why this is so important. I mean, you have scientists, you have people that are in the field of study that have been protesting themselves because they are trying to let the world know that this is a urgent issue. This is not something you can kick down the road. But Reverend Yearwood, help me understand personally that if this is such a huge issue, if this is so important, if the most urgency that we need to have for something that's affecting every single human being on earth, the future is at risk for every human being, why is it that we are so slow to turn the ship towards doing the right thing in this issue? Why are we dragging our feet through the sand on the issue of climate change and environmental justice?
Man, that seems like it's like a lot you said there, but it's like I have a hard. It wouldn't be. It should be a hard answer, but it's not a hard answer. It's boiled down to one word that starts with a capital G, and that's greed. And unfortunately, that greed is literally taking us down as a world and as a beloved community. That is it. That these industries have done everything to keep their bottom line and to keep putting forth this measure in a way that it harms us. I want to say this because, yes, and this is not new for us. We as a people, when we come together, have been able to overcome many things. Obviously, here in America, we've been able to overcome segregation in a way and racism in that aspect, from equality. While there's still work to be done, we've still overcome so much in many aspects, from the job issue, from women's rights. And even though there's been some rollback, we still overcome so much. But this one you're talking about is this. It isn't just about equality, it's about existence. The difference there, if we don't get this one right, there is no second chance. There is no other water fountain to drink from. There is no other community to build. This is the one that takes us all out. So you're right. So right now, there's a thing where the industry is saying that, listen, we know the problem too. They're very aware of the climate crisis. But what they are saying but let us just burn all the oil. Let us burn all the gas. Let us burn all the coal. Let's just get it done. And then when it's done, we'll transition. We know from a science standpoint that we can't wait for you to burn it all before we transition. So to your point, that means that we have the data, we have the research, but now we need one thing that we think we need is storytelling.
Even as you're looking at the March on Washington and what transpired that day, do you think that these 10 demands, do you think that following this, that there was the requisite change that happened shortly after that in the years following, after the demands were given on the March on Washington?
I think we're having this conversation because the answer is no. But I think that the importance of this conversation is that no is not a permanent answer. And I think Dr. King said it when she echoed her mother. We've got to keep working at it. We can't take success as a given or loss as permanent. And so embedded in the Inflation Reduction Act, for example, is roughly $8.8 billion to encourage households to shift from fossil fuels, basically to electrify their homes, to shift to cleaner forms of energy. That, regardless of where you stand on the spectrum of environmental justice, and I stand on the side of justice, there's a job there, because to replace all of the machines in American homes, 42% of carbon emissions in the United States happen in the home. So it's what you drive, how you cook, how you clean, all of those things. We've got to replace 1 billion machines to meet the standards of 2050. Somebody's got to install those machines. Someone's got to manufacture those machines. Someone's got to do the energy audit to find out where you put those machines. Those are jobs. And right now, billions of dollars are being let by federal agencies across the board and across this country. And our opportunity is to demand access to those jobs, to be applying for those dollars, and to say that we want to not only have the narrative say that we want justice, but to compel environmental justice by standing in line and saying we want to not only draw down those resources, but we're going to make sure that our communities benefit. And that's part of the Justice 40 component, but it's larger than that. No, we did not get what we were owed. No action did not take place in a meaningful fashion to solve generations of inequity, but we have a new generational opportunity to make that promise real.
Can I mention something, Cameron? Because what she's sharing is so critical and important for all of us. And one of the things I think that frustrates me today is that there's a gap between the law and what is possible, what is available to people, groups of people. And many of those people are totally unaware. And I think, we had a little bit more cohesion during the time of the movement in terms of communication and education. And I think it's a little bit difficult, a more difficult barrier today, because information is flying everywhere. But the, intentionality and the coordination of how do we really educate people when we have these important pieces of legislation, because a lot of times the focus has been on passing the legislation, but now how do we ensure that the purpose for which the legislation was passed is carried forth? And I think that's a tremendous gap in this day and age. And, as you know, back in the 50s and 60s, we were able to a certain extent, my daddy and them were able to take advantage of the media, but we had the power of the Black media back then, which today, unfortunately, has not been galvanized the same way to disseminate information. And even beyond just, the Black community, I just find that there's a lot of people in the citizenry that are totally oblivious to everything that we're talking about. And this is why, the other reason why this conversation is important today. And I know Stacey has been doing a lot of work in that regard, but we need more institutions and more collective efforts to make sure that everything that we should have access to, we get access to.
Well, Dr. King, if I could even follow up there. So, obviously in the 60s, they didn't have the same access to technology as we do now.
Right.
So we have cell phones, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Facebook. I mean, there are a multiplicity of ways for us to communicate with each other. So for you, and then Ms. Abrams, please feel free to speak on this if you would like. Do you think it's because of the amount of information people are exposed to, or do you think that there's something even perhaps a little more sinister behind that?
You wouldn't ask the sinister word, would you? You would not ask about that. I think it's a combination. There used to be a saying, if you want to hide something from Black people, put it in a book. I mean, that was a statement back then. I think that there are sinister efforts, to ensure that certain information does not get disseminated and get to the people that should get it. But also, there's just a lot of information out there, and people, unfortunately, without guidance, direction, and pointing to here, this is critical. And I think there has to be intentionality and a strategy behind doing all of this. And I think that's one of the greatest lessons that I've learned from both of my parents. They really had intentionality and strategy. In terms of making sure that people knew and had information. So we just have to figure out how to do it a little bit better in this generation with all the information that is coming at people. And again, it's about the coordination. I mean, I think we're all working in our different spaces, but we have not always done a good job of coordinating. We collaborate well. We don't necessarily coordinate the collaboration as well as we should.
I would add part of the work that I'm doing right now, in addition to my service at Howard, I serve as senior counsel for an organization called Rewiring America. One of the reasons they brought me on was to address exactly what Dr. King is referencing, which is that billions of dollars are flowing into our economy, but not everyone knows to put their bucket out and get their part.
Right.
And we define it as an electric bank account. Basically, every American, so if people are listening, every American, by and large, is entitled to roughly $1,800 a year towards electrifying their homes. And that sounds both banal and like a lot of money. But what it means is if you need to upgrade your stove, if you need to replace your heat pump, if you need to have access to a new electric vehicle, there's money for it. But the part of the complication is that it's a federal law that has to be administered at the state and local level. And some states may or may not agree to do it. But we saw that happen with Medicaid expansion. The complication of tax credits and rebates, meaning if you've got enough, if you have too much money, you get this. If you don't have enough money, you may not qualify. And then the way you get it is complicated on the side. And I say all that to say this. Part of the work that I'm doing is how do we demystify what this law means? How do we make it plain for people what they have? But the other part is how do we get other people to treat this as an urgency? Because we are overwhelmed by the challenges. We are overwhelmed by information. It's one of the reasons that fractured communications occurs. We've got so much information coming at us that when the three of us were growing up, and I'm going to guess how old you are, Cameron, when we were growing up, you had four people who told you what was going on. The anchors at ABC, NBC, CBS, and PBS. We may have done different things with that information once we got it, but we all got the same news. We got it at the same time, and you just picked which guy you were going to have tell you what happened that day. Now you can curate your own truth. And sometimes in the curation of that truth, we eliminate access to information that can help us amplify or redesign what we think we know. And so part of what I'm thinking about and what I'm so proud of the King Center for doing is calling the question. It is not just, it is collaboration, it's coordination, but it's also curation. We've got to start deciding that there are other things that matter in our conversations, that there are other challenges we have to address beyond the standard narratives that we are used to, which is not to say that we are pushing those aside. They matter. I am committed to fighting for access to the right to vote. But that also means I understand that the quality of my vote matters based on what I can do with it. And if I can't make sure that they can't locate a chemical plant in my backyard, if I can't make certain that my child doesn't get asthma because the housing standards are wrong, that the state of Texas can't pass a law saying it's illegal for job sites to be held accountable for workers who get sick because of heat stroke. If we can't use our votes to tackle the real problems because we don't know that we have the right to know about all of these things, then we find ourselves in dire straits. And so in my mind, our opportunity is that what we can do and what we should do is not just curate our information and coordinate and collaborate. We've got to elevate the things we want to talk about. And we can't be cordoned off by those who think, well, this doesn't concern you, so go focus on something that does.
Dr. King, to follow up with that, and thank you for that, Ms. Abrams, how would you say that in a small way, because I know this is a broad question for you, but how would you say that the March on Washington and really the legacy that was left there in that moment has helped you as you have inspired and led, and as you continue to grow and build the impact of the King Center around the world? How did that moment impact you personally?
Well, growing up in a family that's always been a part of the social justice struggle, it kind of grows inside of you. And you feel a deep sense of responsibility to contribute. And so I think it's impacted me in that way. Also understanding that as we, level these different fights, that one, we don't do it alone. I think part of the exasperation today, so many people feel like they're alone, which is ironic because so many of them are working together. But I think that's the issue. There's something that has been missing to pull people together to really feel like that we are doing this together, and that we have a strength and a hope, to overcome these challenges. And so for me, one of the things that continues to push me is one, knowing that in my DNA, my personal DNA, not just my bloodline, but I come from ancestors who faced dark, difficult, and challenging moments. And they were able to face them and overcome them. And I'm talking about collectively. Yes, we lost people along the way. But the resiliency, of generations before us, in spite of those dark and treacherous moments and times, people rose to that occasion and passed the baton, and then the baton was picked up by another generation. And I look back and I say, whoa, they are me. I am them. And so I continue in this generation to make, my particular contribution. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, one of the things I think that the movement, and when I say movement, I want to be specific here. The movement under my father's leadership gave to us was nonviolence is a gift. And I don't think people have yet to fully understand that. When Daddy received the Nobel Peace Prize and gave his lecture in Oslo, he said, I suggest that the philosophy and strategy of nonviolence immediately become a subject of study and serious experimentation in every field of human conflict, by no means excluding relations between nations. As a prophet, he understood that nonviolence as a tool, as a weapon, as part of strategy for change, as a means for creating, as they said, both he and my mom, the beloved community, was going to be, people were going to need to embrace it fully in his time and after his time. And we have yet to catch up with that in this nation. And I think people are, you get tired in a movement, period. Let's just be honest. I mean, there's no way around it. You're going to get tired. There are going to be moments, and you need to take some self-care moments. But as a whole, I think they gave us something that while you may physically get tired, your spirit and your soul is energized. If you ever had a conversation, and I don't know, Stacey, if you ever had that opportunity to have a conversation with my mother, whenever she talked about this movement, it's like she became so energized. She lit up. It was like we were in the midst of something great and powerful. Yes, it was hard work, but she knew that she was doing something that was going to be powerful in changing the world. They believed that. There were a group of them that actually believed that, and especially her. I mean, she believed so many things that other people just didn't believe. So I think we need to draw strength from those tools of nonviolence, and begin to work it. But we got to study it, and that's why the King Center has, our online experience and other in-person experience, because we want people to get it. We're fighting some treacherous things right now. And we've got to do it embracing a common philosophical foundation, so that it doesn't tear us apart. And while it may tire us physically, as I said, we will be spiritually infused to be able to make the necessary changes that are needed in our world.